Do not rush past this moment. There are times when a message arrives not because the clock has chosen the hour, but because your heart has finally become quiet enough to hear it. If these words have found you today, allow yourself a single breath of stillness. Something gentle, something long hidden beneath the noise of ordinary days, has been waiting for this meeting. You have wondered why certain feelings refuse to leave you. Why memories appeared without invitation. Why a name, a face, or even a quiet longing returned when you believed the chapter had already closed. You told yourself it was coincidence. You tried to explain it away with logic. Yet deep within you, another voice whispered that not everything meaningful can be measured by what the eyes can see. Listen carefully. This is not a promise of tomorrow. It is not a prediction carved into stone. It is an invitation to notice what has been quietly unfolding around you for longer than you realize. Someone has carried words they never imagined you would one day hear. Not because they wish to hide them forever, but because fear often disguises itself as silence. There are people who believe that saying nothing protects everyone. They convince themselves that distance is kindness, that waiting is wisdom, that burying truth beneath routine will somehow erase what the heart remembers. Yet truth is unlike the wind. It does not disappear because someone closes a window. It simply waits for another door to open. Your story has entered such a moment. Long before today, paths began moving toward one another without announcing themselves. Tiny decisions, forgotten conversations, unexpected delays, chance encounters that never felt important at the time, each became another thread woven into a design too large for anyone involved to understand. You thought life was wandering. Heaven saw preparation. You thought certain endings meant abandonment. Heaven saw protection. You thought unanswered questions were evidence that no answer existed. Heaven knew some answers must mature before they can be received without breaking the one who receives them. That is why you are here now. There is someone connected to your journey whose heart has wrestled with words that remained imprisoned behind uncertainty. They believed those words would remain unspoken forever. They imagined that time had already chosen a different ending. Yet hearts are mysterious places. Sometimes they recognize truth years before courage arrives. Sometimes courage comes only after everything familiar has been stripped away. And sometimes the greatest confession begins long before a single sentence is spoken aloud. Do not mistake silence for absence. Many battles leave no visible footprints. Many prayers never become public stories. Many tears are shed where only heaven bears witness. There have been nights when someone whispered your name into empty air simply to discover whether it still carried warmth inside their soul. There were mornings when they convinced themselves they had finally moved on, only to find that one unexpected reminder unraveled every careful conclusion they had built. This is not because destiny controls people like puppets. Every heart is given freedom. Every choice matters. Every relationship grows, or fades, through the decisions people make. Yet even within human freedom, there are moments when truth patiently waits for someone brave enough to face it. That moment is drawing closer. But before you look toward another person's heart, you must first understand your own. You have spent too much time believing your value depended upon being chosen. It never did. You believed your peace depended upon another person's certainty. It never has. The deepest love cannot grow where identity depends upon approval. That is why so much within you has been quietly changing. Perhaps you noticed it. Perhaps you did not. The things that once shattered you now merely make you pause. The disappointments that once defined entire seasons have slowly become teachers rather than prison walls. Your compassion has deepened. Your patience has stretched beyond what you imagined possible. Even your questions have changed. Once you asked, "Why am I not enough?" Now your soul has begun asking, "What kind of person am I becoming?" That question carries far greater power. Because heaven is always more interested in transformation than performance. You have mistaken waiting for weakness. Yet waiting has been shaping strengths that hurried success could never produce. There is wisdom growing quietly inside those who continue choosing hope without demanding immediate explanations. And there is another heart learning the very same lesson. Though your journeys have been different, they have been preparing similar discoveries. One has learned the cost of silence. The other has learned the value of peace. One has learned that fear can disguise itself as responsibility. The other has learned that love cannot survive where self-worth is surrendered. These lessons are approaching one another. Neither journey was wasted. Every difficult season carved space for understanding that did not exist before. The message that once seemed impossible is no longer impossible because the people involved are no longer who they used to be. Still, there remains one truth hidden beneath everything you have heard so far. It is a truth neither of you fully recognized when your paths first crossed. And until that hidden piece is revealed, nothing else will make complete sense. The hidden piece was not a single sentence. It was the moment someone finally understood what your silence had been carrying. For a long time, they thought they knew your heart. They thought they understood your distance, your patience, your quiet way of stepping back when the room became too heavy. But they only saw the surface. They saw the way you smiled when you were hurt. They saw the way you answered gently when your spirit was tired. They saw the way you kept showing kindness even when no one asked whether kindness had cost you anything. But they did not see the nights. They did not see the prayers you never spoke aloud. They did not see the moments when you almost gave up on being understood, not because you stopped believing in love, but because you were tired of explaining a heart that had only ever tried to be honest. And this is where heaven began to move quietly. Not with noise. Not with force. Not with a dramatic sign in the sky. But through remembrance. A memory returned to them when they least expected it. A small memory. One they had ignored for too long. It came suddenly, like a light entering a room they had kept closed. They remembered your eyes on a day when you said very little. They remembered your voice when you tried to sound strong. They remembered one moment when you gave them grace, even though they had not yet learned how to give grace back. And something inside them trembled. Because for the first time, they did not remember you as someone who waited. They remembered you as someone who loved with dignity. There is a difference, my child. Waiting can sometimes come from fear. But dignity comes from knowing that your heart is valuable, even when another person fails to honor it. And when that truth touched them, they could no longer hide behind the story they had been telling themselves. They had told themselves that time changed everything. They had told themselves that silence meant the feeling had faded. They had told themselves that what remained between you was only memory. But heaven allowed one quiet truth to rise in them again. Some connections do not disappear simply because people do not know how to carry them. Some words remain alive even after they are buried. Some love stories do not end at the moment of separation. They pause until the people inside them become honest enough to face what the pause was teaching. This is why you must not look at your past with shame. You were not foolish for caring. You were not weak for hoping. You were not small for feeling deeply. Your heart was never the problem. The problem was that someone had not yet learned how to stand in front of something real without running from the weight of it. But now, something has changed. A door has opened inside them that they did not know was still there. And behind that door was your name. Not your name as the world speaks it. Not your name as ordinary sound. But your name as memory. Your name as unfinished truth. Your name as the one presence they could not fully replace, even when life became busy, even when other voices surrounded them, even when they tried to convince themselves that moving forward meant forgetting. They did not forget. They only learned how to pretend without realizing the pretending was becoming heavy. And now the heaviness has begun to speak. This is why they have felt restless. This is why small things have been disturbing their peace. A song. A phrase. A place. A date. A dream. A sudden thought that arrives without invitation. Heaven has been allowing ordinary things to become mirrors. Not to punish them. Not to frighten them. But to awaken what was sleeping beneath their pride. Because sometimes the soul does not wake up through comfort. Sometimes it wakes up through the ache of what it almost lost. And yes, my beloved child, they have wondered whether it is too late. They have asked themselves questions they would never admit to others. Would you still listen? Would you still believe them? Would you still recognize the person they are becoming? Would you turn away because they waited too long? They do not know. And that uncertainty has been humbling them. There was a time when they thought they had control over the story. Now they are realizing that no one truly controls a heart awakened by truth. They can delay honesty. They can distract themselves. They can keep busy. They can wear strength like clothing. But they cannot command the soul to forget what the soul has marked as sacred. And this is where your part becomes important. Do not chase what is awakening. Do not force what is forming. Do not lower yourself to prove you are worthy of being chosen. The message you were never supposed to hear is not meant to make you run toward them. It is meant to make you stand still in your own worth. Because what is coming must meet you whole. Not desperate. Not afraid. Not begging to be seen. Whole. Soft, but not broken. Loving, but not lost. Open, but not empty. Your peace is not a waiting room for someone else's decision. Your peace is holy ground. And anyone who approaches it must come with truth. For there is a conversation forming in the unseen place. It has not fully entered the visible world yet, but it is moving. Words are gathering. Courage is being tested. Old pride is being weakened. Regret is becoming reflection. Reflection is becoming understanding. And understanding is reaching toward confession. But before confession can arrive, one final veil must be lifted. Because there is something they never told you. Something they carried quietly. Something they believed would change how you saw them. They thought hiding it protected the bond. But hiding it only created distance. They thought silence saved them from pain. But silence became the very thing that kept pain alive. And when this truth begins to rise, you will understand why certain moments felt confusing, why their actions did not match their feelings, why their heart seemed near one day and far the next. You were not imagining the connection. You were feeling what they were too afraid to name. But the name is coming. The truth is moving closer. And when it finally reaches the surface, you will realize that the message they never thought you would hear was not only about love. It was about the choice they made in silence. And the reason they now fear you may never look at them the same way again. My beloved child. There are moments when truth does not arrive with thunder. It arrives like the first light before sunrise, so gentle that many overlook it until they realize darkness has already begun to fade. The choice they made was never as simple as you imagined. You wondered why they stepped back when their hearts seemed to be moving closer. You questioned why kindness was followed by distance, why hope was answered with uncertainty, and why every step toward understanding seemed to be met by another unanswered silence. The answer was never hidden because you were unworthy of knowing it. It was hidden because they had not yet become the person who could speak it honestly. Fear has a remarkable way of disguising itself as wisdom. It whispers, wait a little longer. It says, now is not the right time. It convinces people that silence is safer than vulnerability. Day after day, those whispers became habits. Habits became walls. And those walls slowly convinced them that if they remained quiet long enough, the feelings themselves would disappear. But hearts do not obey fear forever. What is genuine has a way of returning, not to condemn, but to invite healing. There came a quiet evening when everything around them appeared ordinary. Nothing extraordinary happened. No voice echoed from the heavens. No dramatic event interrupted the day. Yet something inside them refused to remain asleep. A single memory returned, not because they searched for it, but because it arrived on its own. They remembered the peace they felt whenever you simply listened without trying to change them. They remembered how you celebrated small victories that everyone else ignored. They remembered the gentleness you offered even when your own heart carried unanswered questions. For the first time, they stopped remembering what they had lost. Instead, they remembered who you truly were. And that realization carried unexpected weight. They began asking themselves a question they had avoided for far too long. What if the person I was searching for was never missing? That question did not immediately bring clarity. Instead, it brought humility. Because humility often begins where certainty ends. Meanwhile, your own journey was changing in ways you could not fully recognize. The longing that once consumed every quiet moment had slowly become surrender. Not surrender to disappointment, but surrender to peace. You began finding joy that did not depend upon another person's decisions. You discovered strength that did not require anyone's approval. Without realizing it, you stopped waiting for someone else to define your future. That quiet transformation mattered more than you knew. For love that grows from desperation cannot remain healthy. But love that meets two whole hearts has room to breathe. There are seasons when heaven seems silent. Not because nothing is happening, but because the deepest work often happens beneath the surface, where no applause can reach. Roots grow before branches are seen. Character forms before conversations change. Healing begins long before reconciliation becomes possible. Neither of you could have recognized each other fully if your paths had crossed again too soon. One needed courage. The other needed peace. One needed honesty. The other needed freedom from fear. Only then could truth become something more than beautiful words. As these changes unfolded, they found themselves unable to ignore one final realization. The future they imagined without you no longer felt complete. Not because life had become empty, but because they finally understood the difference between being surrounded by people and being deeply known. To be known is rare. To be accepted while fully known is rarer still. They realized you had offered that gift long before they understood its value. Regret has a purpose when it becomes a teacher instead of a prison. Rather than pushing them deeper into shame, it began guiding them toward honesty. For the first time, they stopped asking how they could protect themselves. Instead, they asked how they could become someone worthy of trust. That question changed everything. Yet there remained one final obstacle. It was not another person. It was not distance. It was not time. It was the version of themselves they had been pretending to be. Every mask eventually becomes too heavy to carry. Every carefully crafted image eventually cracks beneath the weight of truth. And theirs was beginning to crack. Very soon, they would stand at a crossroads. One path would lead back into comfortable silence. The other would require complete honesty, even if honesty carried the risk of rejection. No one could choose that path for them. Not you. Not anyone else. Only they could decide whether fear would write the ending, or whether courage finally would. And as that decision drew near, another truth quietly emerged. There was something they had discovered about you, something that reshaped everything they believed about your heart. It was this discovery that made the words they once buried impossible to keep hidden any longer. And those words were closer than either of you realized. My beloved child. Not every revelation arrives because someone finally finds the courage to speak. Sometimes it begins because they can no longer pretend that the truth does not exist. There came a day unlike any other, though no one around them would have noticed. The world continued its ordinary rhythm. People hurried through familiar routines. Conversations came and went. Yet beneath the surface of that ordinary day, something extraordinary was unfolding. They stopped running. Not with their feet, but within their heart. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to sit quietly with every memory they had tried to outrun. They revisited conversations they once dismissed. They remembered moments when your kindness felt effortless, your patience undeserved, and your encouragement unwavering. The more honestly they remembered, the more one realization became impossible to ignore. You had never asked them to become someone they were not. You had only hoped they would become honest about who they truly were. That realization carried both comfort and sorrow. Comfort, because genuine acceptance is a rare gift. Sorrow, because they recognized how often fear had convinced them to hide behind uncertainty instead of trust. There is a lesson within this, my beloved child. Many people believe love fails because feelings disappear. More often, love struggles because fear speaks louder than truth. Fear says, protect yourself. Truth whispers, be known. Fear builds walls. Truth opens doors. Neither voice can be forced into silence, but every heart eventually chooses which one it will follow. As they reflected on their journey, another memory surfaced, one they had almost forgotten completely. It was not a grand moment. It was not a dramatic promise. It was simply the way you looked at them when they doubted themselves. You saw possibility where they saw failure. You offered hope when they expected judgment. Even now, that memory remained brighter than many of the achievements they had spent years chasing. It reminded them that genuine connection is measured less by extraordinary moments and more by consistent grace. Meanwhile, your own life had continued to unfold. You learned to smile without needing every answer. You learned that healing does not erase the past, it transforms the way you carry it. You discovered that peace grows strongest when it is rooted in gratitude rather than certainty. Without realizing it, you had become someone who could welcome truth without being controlled by it. That quiet strength mattered. Because the message approaching you was never meant to awaken desperation. It was meant to meet maturity. The heart that once longed for immediate answers had become a heart capable of receiving whatever came with wisdom. That is a beautiful transformation. Yet the story was still unfolding. They found themselves standing before an unfinished letter. Not written with ink, but written within their thoughts. Words appeared and disappeared. Apologies formed, then faded. Confessions rose, only to be interrupted by old doubts. Again and again they wondered whether honesty had arrived too late. But every time uncertainty urged them to remain silent, another thought gently returned. What if truth is still worth speaking, even when the outcome is unknown? That question became the beginning of courage. For courage is not confidence that everything will work perfectly. Courage is choosing honesty when pretending would be easier. And little by little, that choice reshaped them. They began releasing the version of themselves that always needed control. They began accepting that vulnerability is not weakness but the doorway to authentic connection. With each quiet step, the distance between who they had been and who they were becoming grew smaller. Still, one final truth remained hidden. It was not hidden from heaven. It was not hidden from time. It was hidden only because neither of you had yet seen how your separate journeys were preparing the same lesson. You believed your greatest task was learning how to let go with grace. They believed their greatest task was learning how to speak with honesty. Neither lesson was complete without the other. And as those two paths slowly drew closer, something unexpected happened. They discovered a small reminder of you that they had unknowingly kept all along. It seemed insignificant at first. Yet in that quiet reminder, they recognized something they had overlooked for far too long. It was not merely a memory. It was evidence of the person they hoped to become whenever they were with you. In that single realization, they understood that the message they never imagined you would hear was no longer only about the past. It was becoming an invitation toward a different future, one that could only begin if both hearts chose truth over fear. Whether that invitation would ever be spoken aloud remained uncertain. But for the first time, silence no longer felt like the safest choice. And somewhere beyond what either of you could yet see, the first words of that long-awaited conversation were already beginning to take shape.